저거네요. 미디어 아트처럼 이래서 이렇게 그림 그리면 저기에 이렇게 올라가는 거. 저도 하나 해볼까요? 여기 그림을 이렇게 올린 후 버튼. 쟤다. 쟤 어디 저기 어디로 가버렸어. 정말 어슬렁 다니는데. 둥글리 꽃도 이렇게 피는구나. 식물을 마지막으로 하나 그려볼까요? 배초향, 꿀풀과 얘를 한번 그려보겠습니다. 일층에 이 식물 관련된 데는 예전에 왔을 때는 저도 못 본 것 같은데 이런 것들을 그려보는 것도 되게 좋은 경험이네요. 저는 박물관이나 미술관에서 그림 그리는 건 너무 좋아하는 것 같아요. 정말 다양한 것들이 모여 있잖아요. 그래서 그림을 어떤 걸 그리지? 라는 생각을 사실 할 것도 없이 한 발자국만 옮기면 또 다른 것들이 있을 수 있고, 딴 것보다 얘네들을 더 자세히 볼 수 있고, 내가 본 만큼을 남길 수도 있고. 그래서 오늘의 박물관 드로잉 나들이가 매우 풍요로운 것 같습니다. 식물 이름은 너무 어려워요. 아가스타체 루고사 라고 합니다.
Forward, wishing not to have so much as a speck of shame, toward heaven until the day I die. Suffered even when the wind stirred the leaves, with my heart singing to the stars. I shall love all the things that are dying, and I must walk the road that has been given to me. Tonight, again, the stars are brushed by the wind. 한국에서 가장 많이 사랑받고 있는 시인이 누구일까요? 시인 윤동주입니다. 바로 오늘의 칼 플레이스 장소가 윤동주 문학관입니다. 네, 그럼 여러분 출발해 볼까요? 따단! 자, 어디 보자. 먼 길 내려왔는데, 아, 여기구나. 윤동주 문학관 다 왔습니다. 가장 먼저 눈에 들어왔던 게 뭐냐면 이 우물인데, 이 우물은 원래 윤동주 시인이 살았던 데 스위치 우물이거든요. 그래서 옮겨서 여기다가 이제 냅두는 그런 상태인 거예요. 그리고 우리 윤동주 시청에 자화상이 있잖아요. 거기도 우물이 나타나는 건데, 제가 봤을 때는 이 우물을 보면서 영감을 받지 않았을까 싶어요. 저 바로 제 뒤에 또 여러 가지 사진을 전시되어 있는데, 우리 윤동주 시인이 그때 당시 했던 고민과 생각들 우리 또 직접 체험할 수 있다는 겁니다. 그리고 저기 건너편에는 되게 많은 책의 표지들이 보이는데, 실례가 안 되시면 이게 혹시 어떤 책들인지 알려주시면 안 될까요?
윤동주 시인은 시인이자 문학가였지만 다방면의 책을 많이 읽었던 독서 광이기도 했어요. 특히 백석 시집 좋아했고요, 정지용 시집 좋아했고요, 그다음에 영랑 시집 좋아했고, 그다음에 의례명 시 선집 특히 좋아했습니다. 네.
윤동주 시인의 그때 당시 했던 고민과 생각 우리도 직접 경험할 수 있잖아요. 얼마나 좋은데요.
이분이 또 인왕산자락을 거닐면서 시상을 떠올렸던 그런 인연으로 윤동주 문학관으로 이곳에 세우게 된 그런 계기가 됐습니다.
네, 그러면 이어서 다른 천지식으로 넘어가 보도록 하겠습니다. 따라오세요. 시인 우물 이어서 두 번째 천지식으로 들어왔습니다. 보시다시피 열린 우물이라고 하거든요. 아무래도 우물이라는 전제가 우리 윤동주 시인한테 좀 큰 의미가 있기 때문에 모티브를 삼아서 이런 컨셉을 잡았습니다. 자, 그럼 이어서 세 번째 선지실로 넘어가 보도록 하겠습니다. 소리가 나네. 위에 닫혀 있어서 닫힌 우물이라고 합니다. 자식하거나 침묵하기엔 딱 괜찮은 장소인 것 같아요. 아직도 본인의 작품이 반짝이고 수많은 사람들의 상처를 보듬어 주고 있는데, 그거는 바로 문학의 힘이 아닐까 싶어요. 그래서 여러분들 오늘 하루도 우리 윤동주 시인의 시를 통해서 따뜻한 위로를 느꼈으면 좋겠습니다. 여러분, 우리는 다음 플레이스에서 보도록 하시죠. 바이바이, 여러분.
Millennial and Gen Zs are reshaping the world. News generation shares their fresh perspectives on what's trending now. From global developments to everyday culture, we're diving into the stories that matter. This is News Generation.
Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. South Korea has called on Japan to fulfill its pledge to reflect the history of wartime forced labor at the Sado mines. This comes after Seoul concluded that Tokyo's latest report to the World Heritage Committee failed to clearly explain that Korean workers at the mines were forced into labor there. A special prosecutors team that's been investigating former President Yoon Suk-yeol over allegations of insurrection for the past 6 months has unveiled its findings. The team announced that Yoon and others have been preparing for the declaration of martial law since before October 2023, and that they sought to suspend all political activities and eliminate any opposition. South Korea has unveiled a massive investment plan to support the country's key industries. It plans to spend 30 trillion Korean won, or around $20.4 billion next year, with a focus on artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and future mobility. We begin this morning with historical tensions between South Korea and Japan. Seoul has once again urged Tokyo to uphold its pledge to reflect the history of wartime forced labor at the Sado mines, after it found that Japan's latest conservation report failed to explain the coercive nature of the mobilization of workers. Our Lee Seung-jae starts us off.
South Korea has urged Japan to follow through on its pledge to fully reflect the history of wartime forced labor at a UNESCO World Heritage Site after concluding that Japan's latest conservation report failed to explain the coercive nature of the mobilization of workers there. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs made the call on Monday after the World Heritage Committee released Japan's implementation report on how it's presenting the history of the Sado gold and silver mining complex. The site was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in July last year. South Korea, which is one of the 21 members of the World Heritage Committee, agreed to the listing on the condition that Japan would fully implement the committee's decisions. Those decisions included improving how the site's history was presented and interpreted, particularly its links to wartime forced labor. According to Foreign Ministry spokesperson Park Il, the report shows that Japan has failed to faithfully carry out the committee's recommendations, as well as the pledges it made during the inscription process. Park emphasized that the entire history of these Sado mines must be reflected at the site, not selectively presented. Park also recalled Japan's past commitments. In 2015, when another Japanese industrial site linked to forced labor was granted World Heritage status, a Japanese government representative acknowledged that many Koreans were brought against their will and forced to work under harsh conditions. Japan pledged at the time that it would ensure that this history would be properly conveyed. Seoul has viewed that statement as a reaffirmation of Japan's commitment to present the mines as a former forced labor site. The Sado mines, once known as a major gold producer from the 17th to the 19th centuries, were later used to manufacture war supplies for the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. More than 1,500 Koreans are reported to have been forced into labor at the mines between 1940 and 1945, when Korea was under Japanese colonial rule. Among Tokyo's pledges was the holding of regular memorial ceremonies to honor the victims of forced labor. This year, South Korea declined to attend the Japan-hosted ceremonies for the second consecutive year, citing disagreements over how the events should be organized. Instead, Seoul has held its own memorial services with bereaved family members near the Sado Mines site in Niigata Prefecture off Japan's west coast. Meanwhile, UNESCO's International Council on Monuments and Sites is expected to evaluate Japan's report over the coming months before submitting its conclusions to the World Heritage Committee. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The 6-month investigation into former President Yoon Suk-yeol's alleged insurrection has come to a conclusion, and prosecutors have now announced the details of what they see as the true motive behind martial law being declared. Our Park Won-woo tells us more.
A team of around 240 investigators began probing the case last June, and after 6 months, the investigation has now come to an end. On Monday, Special Prosecutor Cho Eun-seok announced the findings of the probe into insurrection and treason charges allegedly led by former President Yoon Suk-yeol. Cho said the investigation concluded that Yoon's declaration of martial law in December last year was aimed at eliminating political opponents and suppressing dissent, rather than the reasons Yoon cited during his martial law declaration, including repeated impeachments and budget cuts since the 2024 general election in April. Cho added that investigators identified circumstantial evidence showing Yoon and his associates had been preparing for the move well before the actual declaration.
Yoon and others had been preparing for the declaration of martial law since before October 2023. They planned to suspend political activities and the functions of the National Assembly through military force, establish an emergency legislative body to replace the Assembly, seize legislative and judicial authority, eliminate opposition forces, and monopolize power.
He added that December 3rd was chosen to minimize potential U.S. involvement as it was close to the U.S. presidential election. The special prosecutor also revealed circumstances showing close coordination between the government and the military. He said the relocation of the presidential office to Yongsan in central Seoul, where the defense ministry is located, facilitated closer ties, leading to frequent meetings between Yoon and then Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun over plans for martial law. Investigators also said the previous Defense Minister Shin Won-sik stepping down was linked to the issue, as Shin had opposed martial law. And he added that legal risks surrounding former First Lady Kim Gon-hee were an underlying factor, though it was not viewed as a primary motive. Efforts to provoke North Korea were also revealed as a pretext for declaring martial law.
We found that abnormal military operations were carried out from October 2024 to provoke North Korea and justify martial law, but the effort failed when Pyongyang did not respond. Yoon and others then used the political situation as a pretext and declared martial law late on December 3rd, despite having no legal grounds.
Over the 180-day investigation, the prosecution team indicted 27 people, including Yoon, and sent them to trial. With the probe now concluded, around 30 prosecutors, including Cho, will remain to handle trial proceedings, which are expected to take place in early January and oversee the prosecutions in court. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
South Korea has finalized a massive investment plan to secure the nation's future growth engines. At a growth strategy task force meeting this morning, the government confirmed the National Growth Fund will execute over 30 trillion Korean won of investment in 2026 alone. Our Kim Do-yeon has the latest.
South Korea is set to spend 30 trillion won, or around $20.4 billion of its 150 trillion won National Growth Fund next year. Deputy Prime Minister Koo Yoon-chul convened the Industrial Competitiveness Enhancement Ministers meeting on Tuesday, which also served as the Growth Strategy Task Force. During this session, policymakers finalized the operational roadmap for the National Growth Fund. During the meeting, it was confirmed that next year's investment will be done through a public-private matching structure. The government is putting up 15 trillion won through its Advanced Strategic Industry Fund. The capital serves as a primer to attract another 15 trillion won in matching investments from private financial institutions and banks. The task force also designated specific targets for where this investment will be focused. 6 trillion won will be funneled into artificial intelligence. The semiconductor ecosystem will receive 4.2 trillion won, and 3.1 trillion won is set aside for future mobility. But capital investment is only half the battle. The government is also moving to secure the physical infrastructure of trade. Facing rising uncertainties like U.S. tariff changes and supply chain fragmentation, the task force approved the Global Logistics Supply Chain Hub strategy. The specific goal is to secure 40 overseas logistics centers and 10 major port terminals by 2030. The government also plans to raise approximately 600 billion won through a citizen participation fund. This allows the general public to invest directly in these strategic industries to share the fruits of growth. To encourage participation, the government plans to offer tax benefits and provide subordinated financial backing to reduce investment risks for the public. Deputy Prime Minister Koo emphasized that the current administration views the next 5 years as a critical golden time for the economy. He pledged that the task force will continue to oversee these investments to ensure tangible growth. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea's National Security Advisor Ri Sung-nak is traveling to Washington, D.C. today for follow-up talks with the Trump administration on the bilateral joint fact sheet. Speaking to reporters at Incheon International Airport on Tuesday morning, Ri stressed the need for senior-level talks, noting that revising the Korea-U.S. nuclear cooperation agreement and addressing the next steps in South Korea's plan to build nuclear-powered submarines are high-stakes issues involving multiple government agencies. He will discuss these issues with U.S. Secretary of State and Acting National Security Advisor Marco Rubio. Ri also said he plans to discuss peace on the Korean Peninsula, including ways to bring North Korea back to dialogue and ease tensions. The length of his stay has not been announced. Now for more on what to expect from the National Security Advisor's trip to Washington, D.C., we're joined today by Andrew Miller, Assistant Professor of International Relations at Changwon National University. Professor Miller, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So do you think the two countries will be able to accelerate progress on issues such as uranium enrichment, nuclear power submarines, and trade and security agreements outlined in the recently unveiled joint fact sheet now that Ri is traveling to Washington, D.C.?
So this is a very important meeting, and it's really a continuation of the momentum of the progress that's been happening over the past few months. So we have to remember, really over the past sort of 6, 7, 8 months, there's been various different negotiations on trade, on economic policy, security policy. But as you mentioned, we do have the most recent joint fact sheet, which was produced at the end of APEC. Now, APEC finished at the end of October. The joint fact sheet wasn't published until mid-November, which shows us that there are some issues that are very complicated. So this fact sheet, generally, it's a relatively simple statement, a summary of what has been discussed, what has been agreed on, how the two countries will sort of cooperate and coordinate in the future. So the fact that there was this sort of delay shows that there are these complicated issues. So he's going to go to America, discuss the various task force, so the working level task forces that have been created. So on the enriched uranium, on the nuclear propulsion submarine, on the defense budget. So these will be sort of promoted. Do not expect at the end of this meeting, at the end of Ri's visit, that there's going to be a major breakthrough or major announcements. This is really to maintain that momentum, to maintain that progress on the working level.
Right. And in terms of North Korean issues, Washington has repeatedly said, it hopes to resume dialogue with Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader. What issues related to North Korea policy might Ri Sung-nak discuss during his meetings with U.S. officials?
So this one is where I think on behalf of the South Korean government, he's going to go to to the USA, looking for some clarification on exactly what the current US policy towards North Korea is. Now, we say this because in November and fairly recently, there's been these two very important documents. First one was the joint fact sheet, which basically said that both the US and South Korea will commit to the joint statement that was produced in the Singapore summit, which focused on denuclearization of North Korea and also the elimination of weapons of mass destruction and the ballistic missiles program. So we have that in mid-November. But then just a couple of weeks later, we have the US's own national security strategy, which talked about security in Northeast Asia, in the region, but did not mention North Korea. It mentioned that South Korea and Japan and other countries have to do more in terms of security. But the fact that North Korea was not mentioned at all maybe signals that there is a slight shift away from denuclearization, even in the short term, from the Americans. So I think we really needs to go to America and get some clarification on exactly what the current US position is.
I see. And we also recently said the role of neighboring countries like China and Russia is crucial to bringing North Korea back to the negotiating table and achieving denuclearization. But of course, with the war in Ukraine, it's making everything very difficult. What are your thoughts on this, and how do you see the geopolitical situation evolving next year?
So this is really, I think, probably the most complicated issue. So over the past few years, as you know, North Korea has gone through what can basically be described as a sort of a limited de-isolation policy. It's sort of changed the status quo. It's no longer isolated on its own. It has this very strong alliance now with Russia. As you're showing there on the screen, also in September, we saw Kim Jong-un in Beijing right next to Xi Jinping and Putin. So it shows this very strong alliance there. On the other hand, we also have South Korea, who has tried to maintain very good economic relations with both China and especially Russia. And we know that at the end of this month is also the deadline for the Hyundai buyback, which could have very big political implications. So we need to maintain these good relations with China and Russia. But then also on the other hand, you have the fact that South Korea is in a security relationship with Japan and the United States. Currently, Chinese-Japan relations are really at a very low point. Just saw in the news earlier, South Korea, Japan, also some slight issues. And then, of course, we have the US-China issues. So this is a very complicated process. However, I do agree that to get North Korea back to the table on denuclearization will have to involve pressure from Russia and China to do that.
Right, absolutely. A very complicated issue and a lot of things to consider. All right, Dr. Millard, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has welcomed Korea Zinc's plan to jointly invest with the U.S. government in a major critical metals refinery in Tennessee, calling it a big win for America. Lutnick made the remarks in a social media post on Monday, just hours after Korea Zinc announced it has signaled a strategic partnership agreement with the U.S. Department of Defense and Commerce. Under the agreement, the partners plan to build a 650,000 square meter refinery in Clarksville, Tennessee, as part of the so-called U.S. Smelter Project. Korea Zinc and the U.S. government are reportedly seeking a joint investment of around $6.8 billion to move the project forward. Soldiers need to eat nourishing meals, and to give soldiers more flexibility in when and what they eat, the U.S. Army in South Korea has opened its first autonomous dining facility in Daegu's Camp Walker. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung went for a visit.
This is Market 19, a dining facility at the Camp Walker U.S. Army base in Daegu City. But you don't see any big batches or huge pots of food. Instead, there is a state-of-the-art machine that provides tasty dishes on demand when soldiers order them through the touchscreen. In just 5 minutes, a robot turns the ingredients into a dish with toppings on it. Managing the cafeteria has become much easier, with a screen just telling people what to do.
So what is this screen all about?
Sure, so this is our resupply screen. It helps us to know when ingredients are running low and when to restock them.
So basically we need to restock this A1 ingredient?
Broccoli is coming soon, and then also soon pork sausage slices.
The system, the first of its kind at any U.S. military base in the world, helps improve readiness by allowing soldiers to get meals whenever they want.
We basically took the hours of the typical cafeteria and we expanded it. So we're open from 0 to 7:30 to 7 p.m. every day. Gives the soldiers a healthy option all day for them to come in and grab a healthy meal.
Around 10 dishes are on the menu, including Korean dishes added with Katyusha soldiers, the Korean augmentation to the United States Army in mind. But they're not just popular with Katyusha, but with all the soldiers.
The most popular dish, chosen by around 70% of the soldiers, is pork teukdeokkap, with plenty of vegetables and chopped scallions on top.
Robot-made dishes are not only providing soldiers with healthy, hearty meals, but also giving cooks more time to develop new ideas and experiment beyond standard recipes.
But with this machine creating those same formulas for us, we can actually use that extra time given to us to hone our craft more. So you have a cook cooking in a regular dining facility who's doing everything by the standard, but people here, we would work to go beyond that standard and set a new standard for the future of nutrition and the military.
A hearty, well-prepared meal powers soldiers' strength and readiness. Following a 6-month trial period, the USFK will decide whether to expand it to other bases. 김보경, 아리랑 뉴스, 대구.
Good morning, I'm Choo Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. The United States has agreed to provide security guarantees to Ukraine as part of peace talks to end the Russia-Ukraine war. U.S. officials said on Monday that talks with President Vladimir Zelensky narrowed differences on security guarantees, while territorial issues in eastern Ukraine remain unresolved. Trump told reporters the sides are, quote, closer now than we have ever been, citing strong support from European leaders. Officials said negotiations will continue this weekend in the United States, and the proposed guarantees could be submitted to the U.S. Senate for approval. In the United States, Los Angeles police investigating the death of filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Singer Reiner have arrested the filmmaker's son. Police took Nick Reiner, aged 32, into custody on Sunday night on suspicion of murder. Authorities said prosecutors will review the case on Tuesday. Rob Reiner and his wife were stabbed to death in their Los Angeles home on Sunday afternoon. Rob Reiner is best known for directing films such as When Harry Met Sally and A Few Good Men. President Donald Trump on Monday publicly criticized Rob Reiner in social media posts and comments to reporters, saying that he suffered from, quote, Trump derangement syndrome. A Hong Kong court on Monday convicted pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai of violating the city's national security law, a verdict that could sentence him to life in prison. In a trial held without a jury, 3 judges found Lai guilty of conspiring to collude with foreign forces and publishing seditious articles. Authorities arrested Lai in 2020 after Beijing imposed a national security law following mass protests a year earlier. The 78-year-old was the founder of Apple Daily, a pro-democracy newspaper that authorities forced to shut down in 2021. The court will sentence Lai at a later date. The Sydney Opera House on Monday lit a menorah standing in solidarity with Australia's Jewish community after Sunday's Bondi Beach shooting. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns said the lighting sent a clear message that the Jewish community does not stand alone, calling the candles a symbol of resilience and unity.
Those of us in the capital area will see a brief mix of rain and snow. It's not going to be much, so it should not cause major disruption, but there are a few things to watch out for. Most areas will see 1 to 5 millimeters of rainfall, while mountainous regions in Gangwon-do province might get up to 3 centimeters of snow. Please be extra cautious when walking or driving. And this afternoon will be 1 to 5 degrees higher than yesterday, but under cloudy skies. Seoul could reach up to 8 degrees. Gyeongju, Daejeon will be topping out at 12 degrees Celsius. But as the cold eases, another issue rises. The air quality will gradually worsen in the central and western regions. Stagnant air combined with dust arriving from overseas with northwesterly winds will push pollution levels higher. And dusty air will stay with us as the temperature will stay above season norms throughout the week. Meanwhile, wintry precipitation is expected on Saturday nationwide.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.
Korea, a globally recognized sports powerhouse. Behind the dazzling achievements, there's always an invisible force at work. With sophisticated materials, cutting-edge equipment, and innovative technological solutions, SMEs in the K-sports industry play a vital role in bolstering Korea's status as a sports powerhouse. By integrating AI technology, they unlock athletes' potential and enhance performance, elevating the sports environment to the next level and opening new markets in the sports industry. Their innovative technology and bold challenges drive the growth of Korea's sports industry, creating a better world through sports. The innovation of these SMEs never stops. A systematic partnership support program is implemented to discover promising sports SMEs, provide technical validation and R&D support to enhance competitiveness, and strengthen the foundation for overseas expansion. At Tokyo Sportech 2025, the technological prowess of Korean companies was recognized. The Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism, and the Korea Sports Promotion Foundation supported K-sports companies with product promotion and business consultations with global buyers, demonstrating product quality and market potential, and confirming the possibility of expanding into the global market.
저희는 ICT 강국으로서 바이어나 사용자들한테 신기술을 접목한 생활 스포츠 기회를 실질적으로 확대할 수 있는 그 기회를 제공하는 데 많은 도움이 될 수 있으리라고 확신을 합니다.
이제 스포츠도 K죠. K 스포츠는 이겁니다.
The joy for all, created by the power of K-sports. Experience the future of the new sports industry through the innovation and technology of the Korean sports industry.
We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Tuesday, December 16th here in Seoul. I'm Lee Soo-jin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Haeyoung.
Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Happy Tuesday, and also Julian's with us.
Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So it's only the second day of the week, and many of us are still easing into our routines. But sometimes, as we go about our everyday lives, we're reminded of how much the people who raised us have shaped who we are today. So that brings us to today's question. So as you get older, Haeyoung, do you find there are moments when you feel a deeper sense of respect for your parents?
Oh, definitely. I married and had children relatively early by today's standards. But thinking about my parents at this same stage of life really hits me. They were even younger, yet carrying so much responsibility. And my father became the main provider, the breadwinner of my house when he was still in his 20s. And he worked long hours for years. And back then, going to work on Saturdays was normal.
Right.
And my mom, on the other hand, raised us, my younger sister and me, mostly on her own while keeping the household running. And what amazes me is that they did all of this without the kind of support systems we have today. There were no daycare centers like we have now, no government childcare programs, and no online communities for parents, and no dawn delivery for daily necessities. And sometimes I honestly wonder how they managed it all on their own. And when I think about that, I can't help but feel a deep sense of respect and gratitude for what they endured so quietly.
Right, I hear that people feel that a lot, especially when they have their own children.
Yes, that's right.
Do you feel that that's also true for you too?
I have become a new person.
What about you, Julian?
Oh, of course I do. The older I get and the longer I deal with real life responsibilities, the deeper my appreciation for my parents have become. Not only worked for a fraction of the time my parents have, and seeing how they not only had to provide for themselves, but also for their kids too, something I feel very, very deeply grateful and have a lot of respect for. Now, they immigrated to the U.S. about 30 years ago, and while I was able to sympathize with the challenges, I was only able to fully empathize with the challenges of moving to a different country when I actually moved to Korea 2 years ago. But they definitely had it much harder than me, especially when you consider how they moved without knowing anyone in the country, language barriers, and how accessing information online wasn't a thing. For example, like they don't even have Google Translate as much. They don't have a lot of these online services or blogs that they can read to understand how other people, I guess, like experience moving abroad. And even back then, international phone calls were about 25 cents a minute, so which is pretty crazy to think about today because we could FaceTime for free. But I'm sure as time goes on, especially my time living here in Korea, I'll gain an even deeper understanding of their sacrifices.
So I guess that's part of becoming an adult. You can understand what our parents went through. So we're going to dive deeper into this topic, but first let's take a look at the screen. When we were young, our parents felt almost invincible, and maybe that's why misunderstandings were so common. But as we grow older, we begin to see the struggles they face and the sacrifices they made to give their children a better life. Still, differences remain. Values have shifted, perspectives have changed, and the generation gap is very much alive. So today on News Generation, we're highlighting the realities and differences that still persist and exploring what it might take to bridge those divides. As we just saw in a video, there are deeper generation gaps that exist today that shape how parents and children see each other. And there are certain long-held ideas about what a successful life looks like, especially the belief that older generations enjoyed stable careers, secure homes, and a predictable future. But as these stories remind us, that image may be more fragile than it appears. So we often think of older generations as having lived stable lives, but how accurate is that perception really, Seoul?
I think we often talk about older generations through a very simplified image of success. We imagine a life where someone owns a home in Seoul, graduates from a good university, and joins a major company right after they graduate and stays there for decades, steadily moving up the ladder while investing heavily in their children's education. And it's true, many people from that generation did live what we now call a model or stable life. And for a long time, that path was widely seen seen as the definition of success. But when you look more closely, that stability often came at a cost. Work-life balance was something many had to just give up. And behind the surface, their lives were far more fragile than we tend to remember. Some were laid off without warning after years of loyalty to a single company, and others lost businesses they had spent decades building when economic crises hit, or even saw their retirement savings disappear overnight. So I don't think their lives can be judged by a single polished image. Like any generation, their stories are filled with success and failure, sacrifice and regret, joy and heartbreak. So it's really hard to generalize.
Right, and what you said reminds me of a Korean drama that's actually become really popular in English. I think it's called The Dream Life of Mr. Kim.
Yes.
And it highlights how in Korea, you know, the definition of success, especially during that generation, is like a steady job, a house in Seoul, and then a family. But it also shows how, you know, how easily it unravels and how hard it is. And it also really challenges the idea that stability and security, and even lives we once saw as successful, carried hidden risks and sudden turning points. So where does this generation stand now, caught between expectations from the generation above them and also below them, Julian?
Yeah, they really are in a tough position where they're both expected to deliver results and take responsibility for their superiors. Now, at the same time, they're also expected to approach new ideas and show flexibility towards junior employees. But because of the high expectation from both sides, they're also referred to as the sandwich generation. Now, I just talked about the workplace, but this burden isn't just felt in the workplace too. It's also felt at home. Gen X parents are in their 80s and 90s, and because of their age, there is a sense of responsibility to support them financially. Now, at the same time, their children in their 20s and 30s are often facing more unstable futures and careers and may need to rely on their parents for financial support. So having to support not only their parents but also their children is a huge financial burden, and as a result, both the economic and emotional burden is not concentrated just on one side, but because it's simultaneously carried from both above and below, it can be a lot of pressure for them.
So like you said, the pressure doesn't just flow in one direction. It's coming from both sides at once. And it's not just financially, it also happens emotionally as well. But has this also widened the gap in how different generations see today's reality, Seoul?
Yeah, I think this has widened the gap in how different generations see today's reality. I often hear people from older generations say, oh, young people these days are blessed with all the support from their parents, like financial support. Back in the days, like Nat'l and Maria, we had to build everything we have now through pure hard work without much help from our own parents. And that may be true on like a personal level, but sometimes I feel older generations just overlook the reality, characteristics of the era they lived in, what some might even call structural advantages. In the past, effort and time were more directly rewarded, largely because Korea was going through a period of rapid economic growth. But if you entered the right university, there were periods when a stable job at a large company, big conglomerates, was almost guaranteed regardless of grades. But today, there are barriers that individual effort alone can't easily overcome. Even top students with strong GPAs and impressive resumes struggle in a highly competitive job market. And housing is another example. Recent data suggests that buying a home in Seoul can take more than a decade of saving, assuming you even have a stable long-term job. So for many in the MZ generations, securing that kind of stability itself has become the hardest part.
Right, so I could definitely say the rules of the game has changed.
Harder.
Right, because back in our parents' day, like if you did work hard, you'll get promoted and you'll get a good job.
That's
and then you'll eventually be able to afford a house, because you mentioned housing during the latter part of your thing, and then you'd be able to buy a house in Seoul. But now
nothing is guaranteed.
Nothing is guaranteed. That's not true. So how do older generations view this shift, especially when they believe success came through hard work, Julian?
Well, yeah, this generation's catchphrase is, if you work hard, you can succeed. Now, many believe that they had it harder than other generations, but if you look at the history, you can, I guess, kind of understand why they feel that way. Our parents' generation lived through and struggled with numerous social challenges, such as post-war industrialization, the Asian financial crisis, long working hours, and political instability with periods of military dictatorship. However, the reality shows that this catchphrase, if you work hard, you can succeed, is not exactly black and white. The younger generation do feel a deep sense of uncertainty amid the tough current job market, social structures, and other instabilities that currently we're facing right now. And the uncertainty is also felt when thinking about the future. And if they can see that even working at a major corporation doesn't guarantee a secure retirement, you can get laid off at any second, then what really is the best way to set themselves up for success? And this idea is not even just our generation. I think it applies to literally anybody in this current society.
Right, I agree. And it's a reminder that hardship looks different depending on the era, and comparison alone clearly doesn't always lead to understanding. Both generations are responding to very real pressures shaped by completely different social and economic systems. And respecting past sacrifices and acknowledging present anxiety don't have to be mutually exclusive. So we also wanted to find out what you thought too. So we asked on the Arirang News YouTube channel, what is the greatest hardship do you think that was faced by your parents? So here's what the results showed. So the top concern was the dual burden of supporting both children and elderly parents at 57%. This was followed by anxiety about insufficient retirement prep at 22%. Next came other concerns at 12%, while the loss of role or purpose after retirement ranked lowest at 9%. So these numbers show that many parents aren't just thinking about themselves, they're carrying responsibility in both directions. They're thinking about how are they going to take care of their own parents and also their children. So to get another view on this, we'll be speaking with a longtime corporate professional, and that conversation will come right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Lee Jung-hee, who has 20 years of experience in the corporate medical field. Hello, thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So there's a perception that older generations had an easier path to success. So you had 2 decades of experience. So what was your experience actually like?
Looking back, it's undeniable that my generation lived through an era of rapid expansion. If you work hard and follow the company manual, there was a relatively clear ladder to climb. So I understand why the younger generation might see our paths as easier or at least more predictable. However, the reality on the ground was quite intense in a different way. We often call it in the era of growth without safeguard. For most of my 20s and 30s, the concept of work-life balance simply didn't exist. We sacrificed our time with family and our personal health. I'm IMF generation, so I saw colleagues and mentors lose their jobs overnight. The lessons that we learned wasn't about easy success. It was about survival. We lived with the constant fear. The anxiety drove us to work even harder. So was it easier? In terms of opportunity for expansion, perhaps yes. But in terms of the human cost and the pressure of survival without a safety net, it was a brutal time. I look at the younger generation today and I see them fighting in a much more sophisticated, hyper-competitive global arena. They face a different kind of monster, low growth and high uncertainty. I don't think one generation had it easier than the other. We climb a steep mountain with a heavy load, while the younger generation is trying to navigate a foggy jungle without a map. I think we are just walking different paths.
I see. Like you just shared, you must have faced many challenges along the way. But then what helped you stay resilient through a long career in the corporate world?
First, it was a sheer weight of reality. For a long time, my husband was a student, which meant I was the breadwinner. Second, I held on to one principle: never let your mood become your attitude. I trained myself to separate my emotion from my work. Consistency was my strategy. Even on my worst days, I showed up, smiled, and did what needed to be done. Lastly, it was a sense of duty as a woman in a male-dominated generation. I was often the only woman in the room. I felt a heavy pressure that if I fell, people won't say just I fell, but that women couldn't handle it. I didn't want to set a bad precedent for junior female colleagues coming after me. And more than that, the pure joy of achieving something difficult with my team, that shared success was addictive. It made all the hard times worth it.
Great. And just to wrap things up, if there's something that you wish people in their 20s and 30s better understood about your generation?
I think the privilege the younger generation has is the freedom of choice and the validity of diverse values. In my generation, the definition of success was very linear and uniform. However, people in their 20s and 30s today live in a world where being different is celebrated and there are multiple paths to success. So we built our career in an era of information scarcity, relying heavily on grid and face-to-face network. So if sometimes you think we are so obsessed with experience or tenacity, please understand that these were the only tools we had to navigate a rapidly changing world. I think you are digital natives, so if we combine your digital intuition with our experience, can create amazing synergy. And also, the younger generation has the privilege of defining the rules. You have the tool and the mindset to challenge the status quo, whereas we were just trained to follow and optimizing existing rule. One thing I wish you understand about us is that our intensity comes from living through a period of rapid industrialization, whereas stopping meant falling behind. We are not trying to be rigid. We are just used to a pace where survival depended on immediate result. I hope we can learn from your flexibility, and perhaps we can also find some values in our resilience.
You're right. I think there's definitely things that both generations can learn from each other. And for instance, I mean, you said you worked 20 years in one field, which I think is amazing. I can see why you did that. You mentioned how, you thought it was really important to not let your mood become, the way you treat other people, which I think is also really hard to do. Something I still struggle with every day, to be honest. And also, and then you made some really good points about how, as a woman too, there's pressure there too. So, I mean, just listening to you talk about this, I also learned a lot today, and I can see why you were able to work for 20 years, which is truly commendable. Also, so thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we just spoke to a corporate veteran about what a long career really looks like behind the scenes and what she hopes that the younger generation better understands about her generation. We've also talked a lot about the pressures facing the younger generations today, from job insecurity to growing anxiety about the future. Yet these realities are often misunderstood from the outside. So, Taeyang, we've heard a bit about this from our Zoom interviewee, but are there some common misunderstandings that older generations have about the younger generation? What are some of them?
Well, one common misunderstanding is that when younger people change jobs frequently, it's because they lack patience or commitment. In reality, many are navigating a job market dominated by short-term contracts, relatively low pay, and increasingly intense workloads. And staying in one place isn't always a sign of stability anymore. It can sometimes mean enduring conditions that simply are not sustainable. And another misconception is that the younger generation prioritizes personal happiness or self-fulfillment because they are irresponsible or self-centered. But I see it differently. In a future that feels uncertain and unpredictable, finding small, meaningful moments of happiness in the present is often a way of coping, not escaping. So it's how many people keep themselves going rather than giving in to anxiety about what lies ahead.
Right, so like you said, I feel like the younger generation tends to put more value on work-life balance, and there's nothing wrong with that. So what are the realities that young people are facing, Julian?
Yeah, well, there is a perception that our generation is generally lazy and they don't really want to put the effort in to build up their wealth and career, but people can really misunderstand this because of the number of young people classified as economically inactive due to rest have reached an all-time high. But this doesn't mean that they're unemployed because they're lazy. Now, many people have actually, unfortunately, lost a lot of hope because of constant rejection and failures that they get from applying for jobs or trying to find something that really helps with their career. Now, millennials and Gen Zers are also working really hard to grow in their respective fields and trying to navigate a turbulent world. So if they need to rest a little bit, they, they really do deserve it. But I don't think that misunderstanding or the conception that they're lazy is not exactly right.
Right, so we talked about misunderstandings that are happening on both sides. So the question is, what can we do moving forward? So do you have any ideas about this, Hale?
I think moving forward starts with mutual understanding rather than just trying to decide who's right or who's wrong. And older generations may need to recognize how much the structural realities have changed since the time they went to university, entered the workforce, and built their careers. The paths that once led to stability don't always exist in the same way today. And at the same time, younger generations also need to acknowledge that many of the systems and opportunities we now take for granted were built through the hard work and sacrifices of those who came before us. So yeah, reducing generational conflict isn't about just like saying who's comparing struggles, but it's about understanding.
I agree. So Dave, what are your thoughts on this?
Everything you said, I agree. So just to add off of it, misunderstandings are generally one of the root causes of the conflicts between generations, and it really isn't fair to make assumptions about one another without acknowledging the actual real struggles that each generation faces, especially since each struggle is very unique and is very connected to their own generation too. And especially in our world where everything just moves so quickly, it's not only challenging to navigate one's own path and process of becoming, but also to work towards a more, I guess, secure and hopeful future. It's just a lot of work, and that comes with its own struggles. And yeah, we all live in different times, so I think it's really important for all generations to really try to actively understand each other, because we all have our own struggles, and we should be able to more sympathize with each other to make things easier and happier for all of us.
We all need empathy.
Empathy is really important, right? So in the end, it isn't about deciding which generation had it harder, but about understanding how that the world they each grew up in shaped their choices and their fears. So different generations live their different systems, but the pressure to provide and endure is something they all share. So when we look beyond stereotypes, we begin to see not just generational conflict, but shared uncertainty and shared responsibility. And when we try to understand where each generation is coming from, we will have already completed the first step toward easing the divide between them, as we have hopefully done together today. So that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation, but News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Hale.
Always pleasure.
Thanks for coming in. Also Julian.
Thank you for having me.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have the best day. We are News Generation.